Welcome to Module 21, which is a little bit of a back to the future module in the sense that we're revisiting concepts we saw a long time ago. Connections are related to the hub website in the sense that the hub is where we configure connectivity with external applications. So this chapter isn't going to look at the technical side of what is a connection, how does it work. Really, it's going to be how do I make use of a connection in my project. We'll also just draw a line under what they are, because there's lots of different kinds of connection, what they can do, and how I can use them in my project. Connections are, at a simple level, some form of connectivity with the outside world. You'll remember from your very first sessions with Intelligent Advisor that Intelligent Advisor doesn't store any data anywhere. It expects you to have a benefit management system or a customer management system. It expects you to know where your data is coming from and where your data is going to. If you have an application that uses one of the standard technical means of communicating, such as using web services based on SOAP or a web integration platform using REST, you will be able to talk to Intelligent Advisor. So you'll be able to send something to Intelligent Advisor and Intelligent Advisor will send it back to you. At a simple level, we could say, like it says in the second bullet point, imagine an interview that opens and there are 4 questions on the first page, but 2 of the questions have already been answered. The data is already written in the boxes. That data has come from somewhere. It has come from a customer management system or a benefit management system. The point is, it's been loaded into the interview thanks to a connection to some other application. Let's imagine that at the end of the interview, when you submit everything and say thank you, goodbye, that everything you've entered goes somewhere for some purpose. What we've just described is essentially the mechanism behind a connection. A connection lets you load data into an interview or send data away from an interview. Notice the screenshot. The screenshot is from the Data tab of Oracle Policy Modeling, and I'm going to go there in a minute. And it basically says, what would you like to do? The default option, which you can see right here, is there is no connection. Then there are 2 choices here, choice A and choice B, I'm going to call them. We're going to focus on choice A in this chapter because connections are the second radio button. The third radio button uses a different kind of technology to communicate with the outside world, which we'll cover in a different chapter. Notice that it says load or save to CX Sales and B2B Service, Service Cloud, Siebel, or another specific application. What we should really write there is any application that supports web services. So we've got lots of options. So your job, maybe, when you create a new project, is to go to the hub and select a connection. Let's imagine that you are living or working in a very large company and you have lots of different applications that can talk to OPA. You need to know which connection to choose. I can't help you with that. You're going to have to ask the person who set up the connection because they get to give it a name. So let me demonstrate how this would work. I'm going to switch over to the application. I've already logged into a hub. So you need to log into a hub to be able to do this because the information is held on the hub. I'm going to click the Mapping Settings button and up comes the 3-button dialog. I'm going to say, well, I've got one of these and it says map to the application's data model from within Policy Modeling. So there's work I'm going to have to do. I'm going to click OK and a pop-up list will appear, and in this list are a variety of applications. Like I said before, I need to know which one to pick. I'm going to pick this one because this is the application I've been told I should connect to. And I will click OK. So in this case, because I chose a different kind of application, you'll notice that the options are different. I get to choose different objects at the start and I get to choose different objects at the conclusion of the interview, and what I can do with them has changed as well. So this is another important point. What you receive as input and what you can send back as output depends not on you, but on the external application. Each external application will have been configured to provide different data in input and different data in output. So you need to learn to work with, if you'll think of it this way, the data model of the other application. So I'm going to say I'm going to load in account, and I'm going to update account. I'm going to click OK. I immediately get a warning message. It says, wait a minute, you just told me you were going to load account and then you were going to send account at the end. So you're missing a bunch of things to make sense to me. The required field is not mapped out. So it means that I now have things that I need to create and map. Mapping means putting my Intelligent Advisor work and putting it alongside the work of the other application and mapping the two together. Let's take an example. I would say I need to create an attribute. Let's call it the organization name. And I want you to notice that I can now select for mapping in or mapping out, or both, items of data from the external application. So I'm going to choose, simply because it's the one that it just reminded me of, let's try organization name in input and organization name in output. Notice that in the output it signals with a star to say, you must give me this, because you told me you want to update an account and this is a required field. So I will now click OK. And you will notice that for the time being, at least in the data tab, the error has gone away because I have provided in output a piece of information that is required by the external system. I'm going to create a new entity. Oh, I didn't mean to create two. Let's delete that one. Creating a new entity, when I create the new entity, it may also be possible that I can then bind my entity to an entity in the external application. So there's an external application entity called activity. I'll click OK. And I get another message saying, hang on a minute, you need to complete further activity here. So I am going to simply say at this stage that if I create new entities and map them, I will need to configure the input mapping and the output mapping accordingly. You might have noticed when I created my input mapping for my object that there was also a feature here relating to dynamic mapping. We'll talk about that in just a minute, but certain objects allow you to do a different kind of data load. At this stage, it doesn't matter. We'll see it in the slides. I think I'd summarize this little demo by saying that as soon as we get involved in input and outputs, we become constrained. There are things that we must do in order to make this integration work. I'm going to delete that entity for the time being. And I'm going to delete the two extra attributes. You'll notice there's another warning message in the interview tab. And it says, wait a minute, you said you were going to send stuff back, but it's expecting, therefore, that my interview will contain a submit button, because a submit button is how we trigger the sending back. So I'm going to add a new screen, and I'm going to add a submit button. To create a submit button, you select the next button and you choose submit. And the warning message goes away. So, as I said before, as soon as we start dealing with an external application, we come under constraints. Constraints of how we build our mapping, because there will be required fields and things like that in the other application. But also constraints about how we build our interview, because we need to know when to send the data back to the external application. Connections have a specific type, and I demonstrated two types that gave slightly different ways to configure the connection. Basically, we could say that there are several types that are unique to Oracle applications: Service Cloud, Engagement Cloud. One which is entirely generic, which we call the web service connector. The other radio button that appeared on the original dialog right at the very beginning was also a different kind of connection. It was not to an application, it was to an integration service. So we could go so far as to say that there are actually 4 different kinds of connection. As we saw, in summary, they allow us to map data in at the start and map data out at the submit. Once you've made that initial connection, you are constrained by the requirements of the external application. So you might find yourself having to go to the input mapping or the output mapping and selecting required fields that must be mapped out, or you must be adding extra entities and mapping them to external objects in the other application to make sure that you're sending the right data out or receiving the right data in. So if your job is to pre-populate data in your interview, you will focus on the input mapping to begin with, mapping data into your project. If you're then focusing on sending data back to the application, you will be looking at the submit, the output mapping as it's called. And as I showed you briefly, each individual attribute has its own mapped in and mapped out selections. So you can go through each of your attributes if you've already created them and map them to individual fields in the external application. Be prepared that the names that you see in those drop-downs are not in the same format as Intelligent Advisor, because you're not in Intelligent Advisor. When you're looking at that drop-down, you're looking at the data model of the external application. I briefly touched on this, and now's the time to come back to it again, is that in certain situations, some connections have a feature called dynamic data loading. What does that actually mean? So far, we have said that you can load data at the start and you can send data out at the submit. Good. But sometimes you want to load data in the middle of your interview. It doesn't have to be in the middle, but let's just say not at the start and not at the end. This is known as dynamic data loading. It could be, for example, that you're halfway through an order process and you now want to load in the orders by the same customer in the last 30 days. So you want to see if they've been a loyal customer. There's no point in doing that at the beginning maybe, because you only want to talk about customers who have created a new order. So you need to do this after the customer has created an order. You need to load in the existing orders. So that would be a dynamic data load on the order entity, and you would write conditions, as you can see here. You can see here I've actually created an example that says bring in the orders that match this criteria. The incident equals the incident ID, the order total is greater than 100, the shipping starts with UPS, and so on and so on and so on. So I've created a constraint that says don't bring me back all the orders for this customer, only bring me back the orders that were with UPS that had a value greater than 100. So it's a way of reducing the amount of data that I'm going to load. It's only available in certain circumstances, and if it doesn't exist in your connection, then it's only the people who manage the external application and the external connection that can help you. It's not something you can do to fix it. Oops, I beg your pardon. I also want to focus on this here. You can just see this maybe. You can see that there's multiple ways to map orders. Let's read through that. It says mapped to orders, load all instances that meet one or more conditions. Then you have some other options. It says via orders contact of logged in contact, or via orders order incident of incident. When you see this kind of thing, it's synonymous with, in my experience, a customer relationship system. Because in a customer relationship system, orders could be from a customer, they could be about a problem, they could be as a result of another order, they could be as a result of an incident, they could be a result of a product defect. There's, if you pardon the expression, there's many different ways to slice and dice orders. So what's happening here is it's saying, listen, do you really want all the orders? Or do you want just the orders for this incident? Or do you want just the orders for this customer? Or do you want something different? So this list of relationships helps you identify what subset of orders you want. And if you look very carefully, you'll see that they have different icons. You can probably just about see that there are icons there. This is telling me that, well, if you just see the book icon, I'm afraid you're going to be able to read this stuff, but you're not going to be able to edit it. Whereas one of them has a pencil as well. So it also shows you that, oh, okay, the external application doesn't expect me to be able to edit that, but if I choose this, I'd be able to edit the orders. Again, this is nothing to do with the functionality of Intelligent Advisor. It's really what's been implemented by the external application, but you need to think very carefully when you're doing this, what's the right choice? So, done. You've made the mapping, you've mapped the attributes, you've added your submit button. After that, you write your rules as normal. You focus on the policy model and the policy rules as normal. Because your policy model will evolve, it's also challenging if at the same time as you're evolving your rules and your policy model, that the external application is evolving. If your external application is something like Oracle Siebel, where people may be working on it as we speak, configuring new fields, changing relationships, and so forth, be prepared that you might come into your project and be confronted with something like this. You made a mapping, and this is an outbound mapping, and all of a sudden it says there's a problem. Not to worry, this typically happens when the developers of the external application have actually changed the name or changed how something works. So you would need to return to the original mapping setting option and click the refresh button and then go back and edit any of these. So it's quite normal in a dynamic situation to be confronted with things that change. I mentioned previously that when you select an entity, you're binding to an external data source. And there's one other feature that you might find useful, is that when you're binding your entity to a customer relationship management system, for example, you might find that there are multiple choices available to you as to how you want to bring in this data. You'll notice that I've mapped an entity called the incident. Beg your pardon. I've mapped an entity called the incident here to an object called incident in the external application. But it offers me several choices. It says, do you mean the incidents with time billed entries? Do you mean incidents assigned to this company? Do you mean incidents with threads according to this company? And so on and so on. So there are lots of different options. Basically what this means is the external application has lots of different ways to express the idea of incidents, and you can choose one of these. Notice also how the icon is different in some of them. That's telling you that some of them will be read-only and some of them will be editable if you want to let the user change something on that entity. I mentioned this earlier, but it's just a good summary, is that Service Cloud is a little unique in the sense that it has its own specific dialogue to help you build the connection with Intelligent Advisor. And it's because Service Cloud has essentially 3 different ways to interact with it. Are you interacting as a member of staff? Are you interacting as a recognized customer? Or are you interacting just as someone who's browsing the website? So those 3 choices are critical to what data you can receive from Service Cloud. There are many different kinds of connection. We've already seen several of them. So you'll see here, I'm looking at a page in the hub. You can see that I have Service Cloud. You can see that I have Engagement Cloud. I have Oracle integration. I have web service. I have a whole bunch of different types. One type that we haven't mentioned, which is quite useful, is the static metadata type. It's not really a connection at all. It's a fake connection. Let me give you an example. You are planning to integrate Intelligent Advisor with Engagement Cloud, but Engagement Cloud isn't ready yet. You know roughly what it is you want to integrate with, so the technical team build a fake connection. They build what is known as a static metadata connection, which allows the rule designer, the rule author, to go ahead and map, even though the application isn't ready yet. It can be quite useful. So, what do I want you to remember from this chapter? I really want you to remember just 3 things. 1, that connections always connect you to the outside world, and in the majority of cases, they connect you to an application of some sort. Service Cloud, Engagement Cloud, Siebel, or any other application that supports web services. 2, if you start connecting Intelligent Advisor to an application, you suddenly get constraints. You must map a field that's required. You must do this. You must add a button. You're no longer really working with the constraints of Intelligent Advisor. You're working with constraints imposed by the other application. And we've seen that nonetheless, being able to map input and outputs allows you to build interviews where you have questions that are already answered or data that is sent back to an external system. That's it.